Good afternoon, and thank you on behalf of the Federal Reserve System for joining us today. I'm Dave Saponaro, First Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and beginning next month, the new Payment Strategy Director for the Federal Reserve System. I'm honored to assume leadership of our efforts to improve the end-to-end speed, efficiency, and security of the nation's payment system, as described in our January 2015 paper, Strategies for Improving the U.S. Payment System. Earlier this month, the Federal Reserve published another paper, Federal Reserve Next Steps in the Payments Improvement Journey, in which we outline the next phase of work on this important initiative. In this broadcast, you'll hear more about the progress to date and challenges, and the specific initiatives planned to continue the momentum toward a better payment system. Joining me for this discussion are Federal Reserve Governor Jay Powell and Esther George, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Governor Powell, who took office in May 2012, co-chairs the Federal Reserve Payments Improvement Oversight Committee with responsibility for overseeing implementation of the paper strategies. Esther George, President of the Kansas City Fed since 2011, serves as executive sponsor of the Federal Reserve's activities supporting payment system improvement. She also chairs the Federal Reserve Committee responsible for overseeing the Federal Reserve Bank's payments businesses and providing direction with respect to the evolving payment system. I've asked Jay and Esther to offer their thoughts and some perspective on what has been accomplished so far and what lies ahead. Afterwards, we'll entertain questions submitted by the public and our viewers since the Next Steps paper's release on September 6th. Let's begin with Governor Powell. Jay, would you get us started by talking generally about the U.S. payment system, where we are in this multi-year effort to make improvements, including our shared vision for the future?
Thanks, Dave. As you know, in the U.S., much of our traditional payment system operates on decades-old infrastructure that has adjusted slowly to the evolving demands for greater speed and safety. Our payments landscape is also large and diverse, with a wide array of financial institutions and service providers, which can make large-scale improvements difficult and time-consuming to implement. So with that in mind, it's easy to understand why some form of coordinated action is the best way to pursue fundamental and successful nationwide improvement. Federal Reserve has a long history of successful collaboration with the private sector to make payment system improvements. Importantly, we believe that proactive industry initiatives and collaboration provide the best way to address the needs and opportunities that are evident in today's payments landscape. Stakeholders from virtually every sector of the payments industry espouse this philosophy as well. A collaborative approach ensures that changes are designed by those whose commitment and expertise are needed to achieve the desired outcome. And in these efforts, the Fed has been and will continue to be a leader and a catalyst for change. Our next steps convey our commitment to providing the infrastructure for industry work efforts where needed, with the goal of being inclusive and effective in advancing that work. The Federal Reserve has often made use of its ability to convene stakeholders in the payment system and encourage them to identify issues and work together to make fundamental improvements. We took that approach back in 2015 when we convened two separate task forces. These efforts set the payments industry on course to develop safe, real-time, ubiquitous payments for consumers and businesses everywhere, and to address the most pressing security concerns in today's systems. The task forces have made significant progress over the past 2 years. The Faster Payments Task Force completed its work in July with the issuance of its final report and recommendations. The group's accomplishments included creating effectiveness criteria for faster payments, highlighting various industry capabilities and solution proposals for faster payments, and outlining an action plan for building a safe, ubiquitous payment system. In its recommendations, the Faster Payments Task Force recognized the Fed's unique capability to facilitate industry agreement and called for our support in advancing a number of collaborative work efforts. At the same time, we also focused heavily on the absolute need to make payments safe and secure for both the sender and the receiver in any financial transaction. The Secure Payments Task Force has dedicated itself to bringing a security focus to faster payments criteria and solution proposals, in addition to envisioning a path forward for stronger security across other payment systems and processes. Later this year, you'll see the first of several work products coming from these efforts. The Next Steps paper, published earlier this month, acknowledges this progress as well as the considerable market activity aligned with our desired outcomes for payments improvement. It puts forward a series of refreshed strategies and describes 9 new tactics the Federal Reserve will employ in collaboration with the payments industry to make further progress. In addition to the tactics described in this Next Steps paper, the Federal Reserve will continue to advance the initiatives currently ongoing, consistent with the original strategies paper. Soon, we envision faster payments capabilities for moving money in near real time that are safe and available to every American consumer and business. We also envision a secure payment system that enjoys unfaltering public confidence. The driving force behind this security will be a proactive and nimble payments ecosystem that effectively responds to the rapidly evolving threat environment. We envision this safer, faster, more efficient payment system not just for the payments we make at the corner store or to the babysitter, but for the payments made while traveling abroad or to receivers in a foreign country. As we reaffirm our commitment to advancing payment improvements through these next steps, we echo our original call for all stakeholders to engage and continue their commitment to improving the U.S. payment system. It's an ambitious vision for the future, Dave, given the difficult challenges inherent in each of these goals. But it's achievable through continued cooperation and collective commitment from all of us, the Fed and the industry, to these outcomes.
Thank you for those perspectives, Jay. Esther, perhaps you could share more about the new tactics that are part of this Next Steps paper. They include facilitating industry agreement to address a number of key issues, but also contemplate whether the Fed will need to play an operational role to achieve the desired outcomes.
Thank you, Dave. As Jay mentioned, our next steps reflect an ongoing need for industry engagement across all of the desired outcomes. I'll speak to those first. One area noted by the Faster Payments Task Force as important to achieving its vision is an industry-led governance framework for decision-making. To this end, the Fed is chairing and facilitating an industry work group referred to in the Next Steps paper as the Interim Collaboration Work Group, or ICWG. This group's membership mirrors the task force in its broad representation and inclusive approach to its work. The group will publish and seek comment on its recommendations from all payment system stakeholders with an ambitious goal to implement the governance framework in 2018. The task force also asked for the Federal Reserve's help to initiate the groundwork for some of the key components of the Faster Payments Governance Framework, including rules and standards, directory models, and legal and regulatory frameworks, all of which will ultimately be considered and implemented by the governance entity. On the payment security front, we will continue supporting industry efforts, most notably in the near term through the Secure Payments Task Force, with the potential for additional targeted efforts as needs are identified. Early next year, the Federal Reserve will undertake a payment security study that will help to define the nature of future industry engagement, focusing on opportunities that will have the greatest impact on mitigating the incidence and cost of fraud for all participants in the system. This study will assess payment security vulnerabilities, identify contributing factors and potential mitigation approaches, and consider the incentives of participants to implement strong payment security. As recent events have highlighted, data breaches and cybercrime pose significant threats to the public's confidence in our payment system. We must continue to work to reduce these risks and advance the safety, security, and resiliency of the payment system. We all recognize the importance of our collective focus here, and I encourage organizations that are not yet participating in these efforts to join us. Collaboration has been and will continue to be core to enhancing the efficiency of domestic and cross-border payments. Through analysis and industry dialogue, we will continue to seek more clearly the drivers of continued check use and barriers to cross-border payment improvements. With this deeper understanding, industry efforts can be focused on implementing solutions. The tactics I've mentioned reflect our continued commitment to drive progress as a leader and convener of industry stakeholders. We will also consider how our role as a service provider might address the challenges in achieving these desired outcomes, as the task force and other industry stakeholders have recommended. Our plans call for pursuing settlement services that address the future needs of a ubiquitous, real-time retail payments environment. We've made enhancements in recent years to existing settlement services and expanded settlement options for private sector clearing arrangements through the recently announced availability of joint accounts. With a clearer view of the developing faster payments marketplace, we will consider alternative models for enhancing our settlement mechanisms to support real-time retail payments over the long term. Beyond settlement services, we'll evaluate the need for other capabilities in the faster payments ecosystem and whether the Federal Reserve should provide them. Our analysis will explore a range of options in the context of current and potential market developments and challenges and the conditions that might indicate that our operational role is needed. Of course, core to this assessment, the Federal Reserve will be guided by its criteria for offering new products and services. These criteria include the need to fully recover cost over the long term, the expectation that the new service will yield clear public benefit, and the expectation that other providers alone cannot be expected to provide the service with reasonable effectiveness, scope, and equity. The outcome of our analysis will be shared publicly, and any proposals for new services will be published for comment consistent with our long-standing policies. The bottom line is this: we are counting on the continued commitment we've observed from so many stakeholders over the past 2 years to continue to advance this important work.
Thank you, Esther, for highlighting some key aspects of the Next Steps plan. At this point, I'd like to ask you and Governor Powell to respond to several of the questions we've received over the past few days about the Next Steps paper and the progress that has been made since the project began in 2015. So let's begin with audience questions. President George, our first question is from a consulting firm. They ask, what steps is the Federal Reserve taking to help drive adoption of faster payments in the United States?
Well, let me first say that the progress we've seen over the last 2 years has been very encouraging. And to sustain that momentum, the Federal Reserve issued the Next Steps paper a few weeks ago to describe those tactics that we saw to further the adoption of faster payments. The first of those, importantly, is going to be this continued collaboration with the private sector as they work to develop the ecosystem around faster payments. The second tactic that we outlined in that paper was to look at the Federal Reserve's settlement services and to gauge what role those could play in terms of advancing faster payments in this country. And finally, beyond those settlement services, to look at other capabilities or the Federal Reserve's role in other ways that might facilitate the adoption as we go forward.
So this is going to be a lot of work for us. I know we're committed to getting it done as expeditiously as possible.
Absolutely.
Our next question comes from a non-bank provider. Governor Powell, the Faster Payments Task Force assessed various faster payment solution proposals that outlined approaches to new faster payment systems in the United States. Does the Federal Reserve believe there has been significant market activity toward deploying faster payment solutions?
Thank you, Dave. And yes, the answer to that is absolutely yes. As President George indicated, we're seeing significant progress, including in the development of payment solutions, faster payment solutions by private sector parties. You know, we worked closely with the private sector on the task forces, and this was an intended result, and we're happy to see it beginning to emerge. And what we're seeing is private sector parties are designing and in some cases implementing the beginning stages of faster payments initiatives. So we're excited about that, and we're hoping to see, you know, more and more momentum on that as we go forward.
Excellent market development for sure. President George, a private sector organization is curious if the Fed-sponsored collaborative work groups will address domestic interoperability to help maximize ubiquity of faster payment solutions in the United States.
So Dave, even as we've experienced this tremendous progress, I think there's no question one of our greatest challenges at this point are the issues around interoperability, ubiquity, and this universal access that we seek with faster payments. And so to achieve these outcomes, I think the next step that the task force is taking is to look at this governance framework. A governance framework will help those that provide faster payments engage and understand what the rules of the road will be. So that's going to be a very important next step as we go forward.
So our next question is from a community banker. It's also for President George. It says, the January 2015 strategy paper discussed the possibility of the Federal Reserve providing directory tools. Does the Federal Reserve plan to further explore providing a directory service to help provide the industry with direct and universal access to the payment system?
So going back to the paper that we issued in 2015 that talked about desired outcomes and the strategies for faster payments, we recognized that directories would be core to that. And so as we go forward, looking at what models will serve the facilitation of faster payments, we'll be looking at those with the industry. We'll also be looking at that for ourselves around all the criteria that we normally look at when we provide services to see to what extent there are different ways for us to engage and facilitate, remember, that very ambitious goal of 2020 for implementing faster payments. And I think there may also be opportunities for us to look at our existing services around directories and see if there's enhancements there that we can bring about.
Very important tool to get to ubiquity. So Governor Powell, the next question is for you. A non-bank provider submitted the following question. The Federal Reserve Board released final guidelines that will be used to evaluate requests from depository institutions for joint accounts at Federal Reserve banks. What are next steps for depository institutions that would like to pursue a joint account arrangement?
So joint accounts are a good example of our efforts to provide settlement options to address the evolving needs of the marketplace. And as people should understand, they're held at the Federal Reserve banks, and they're intended to facilitate settlement between depository institutions that are taking part in private sector payment systems. And so while the account holders have to be depository institutions, the agent and the operator of the payment system don't have to be. It's an exciting area where we can really facilitate faster payments. And to learn more, you can look on the website of the Federal Reserve Board at federalreserve.gov, or probably even better, talk to your local reserve bank, and you can get all the information you need about this.
So the next question, a consultant posed the following question for President George. The desired outcome for security notes that the mission is to keep the U.S. payment system security very strong, which frames security in terms of an ongoing focus on maintaining security and confidence in the payment system rather than a specific end date. Will the Federal Reserve take a more active role to educate stakeholders on the costs and benefits of additional security?
So there are two things I would mention here. We've had a lot of attention on faster payments, but I think without question the security aspects of this are one that will be essential both for existing payment systems as well as whatever faster rail unfolds here. So two aspects of this. We'll continue to work with the Secure Payments Task Force as they put out later this year some scenarios that show various aspects of security as a way really to educate those that are in the payment system today, those that rely on that payment system. I think education is going to be critical there. The second step we're going to be taking will be one the Federal Reserve will initiate, and that is a study to look at the payment system, to begin to drill into some of those issues, to understand what are the costs, where is the risk in that payment system, and where might we have incentives that are not adequately aligned to achieve the best security that we can get going forward. So those two pieces are going to continue to be important, and as the question notes, it's not a specific arrival point, right, but one that is likely to be ongoing given the dynamic nature of the security issues.
It's certainly a journey, and as we make progress, the threat environment changes, and we'll continue to need to take additional steps. So I know we're going to be focusing on that a lot over the next several years. Next question for Governor Powell. A member of an industry trade organization asks if the Federal Reserve has plans to improve the payment system as it relates to checks.
Interesting question. So we talked to the industry about this and the public in general, and we hear two things really. One is people don't see, and we would agree, we don't see check clearing as a high priority area for investment. So that's the first thing we hear. The second thing we hear is people really don't want to see a sunset date for checks. And with 18 billion checks still written annually, it's safe to say that checks are going to be with us for the foreseeable future, indefinitely. And because of that, of course, we will continue to enhance our payment clearance and settlement services for check clearing as well as our other services.
Yeah, I know in the Next Steps paper we outline a continuation of our work with the private sector to try to electronify many of those current paper-based checks, particularly on the business-to-business side. So it's a tough nut to crack, but we're going to continue to do that work as well.
Yep.
Thank you, Esther and Jay, for sharing your insights on the industry and the Fed's efforts to pursue payment system improvements. In closing, let me invite our viewers and all interested stakeholders to join us in building a better payment system for the future. Our collective efforts to deliver faster, safer, and more efficient payments will create opportunities and better serve consumers and businesses throughout the U.S. and the world now and for many years to come. The Federal Reserve is pleased to provide opportunities for all stakeholders to engage and have input on these work efforts. You can follow this work, share views, submit questions, and find out how to get involved at fedpaymentsimprovement.org. Thank you for joining us today and your interest in our payment system improvement work.